One of the biggest needs in the state of Arkansas right now is the need for foster parents. We're talking to Bethany Bratton right after this on the Spotlight. Three, two, one. Coming to you from the beautiful Alathus building in downtown Russellville, we welcome you into the Spotlight on this Tuesday. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Drew Brent, and if you're in the market to buy or sell your home, you need to call Alathus Realty right now. It's 479-968-5668 or cruise on over to russellvilleliving.com. One of our fine agents is always ready and willing to assist you in any of the needs that you have for real estate. So give us a call today, 479-968-5668, or cruise on over to russellvilleliving.com. Remember, if you miss any of our Spotlight episodes, you can always subscribe to have them delivered right to your phone. Just go to Google Play, Spotify, or iTunes today and have them delivered as soon as they drop. One of the biggest needs in the state of Arkansas and in this community is the need for foster parents. And we are joined now by Bethany Bratton. She represents Casa 5th Judicial District.
Hi.
Bethany, how are you this morning?
I'm doing fantastic.
It's so good to have you here because you are talking about something that really is a place in my heart. We've got foster children who are in the system that definitely and desperately need foster parents. Walk me through this. Just how big is the need right now?
Across the state, the need is quite huge. What we particularly focus on are especially those kids who are not going to be able to have a foster home, and we serve all of these kids. The kids in the shelters, the kids in the facilities. CASA has volunteers that come in, and we actually work one-on-one with these kids as volunteers, making sure they have somebody consistent in their life, no matter what they're going through at all times.
And when you say that you're with the kids, you're really advocating for them in different respects. Kind of walk me through that.
Okay, so when we say we're advocating for the kids, what that does is we actually go in at least once or twice a month, if not more, and we meet with the kids. The advocate or the volunteer will actually go in and make an appointment and talk with the kids, meet the kids, find out their needs, their wants. Are they feeling safe? And then we turn around and take what they tell us, do a little bit of our own investigation and kind of things like that. But we take it back to the judge. And so if there's something truly missing in their lives, something that's just not laying out correctly, say they've lost counseling somewhere in a transition, lost glasses, things like that happen, we're able to take that back to the court and let the judge know, hey, this child's really lacking in this area. It's needing some help.
Now, are these kids who are currently in the system, kids that may be evaluated for the system? They're in foster homes already. Which of these kids are we speaking to?
They're already in foster care. We have a few cases that the judge asks us to be on when they are still in their homes and maybe on the brink of getting them to be brought into foster care. But more often than not, majority of our cases are kids that are already in the foster care system.
Several years ago, my wife and I were looking into this, and I saw a letter to Santa from one of these foster kids, and it broke my heart because one of the things that this child asked for was, I just want my own toothbrush. I want my own bed set, things that an 8 and 9-year-old kid shouldn't really be asking for. When we are walking through these situations with these foster kids, do you see that it's similar fairly across the board, that these kids really just need stability?
Yes. Permanency is the ultimate goal for CASA for these kids. We want to advocate, but we want to find them a safe and permanent home as soon as possible. We don't want them lingering in the system for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. That's, bouncing from place to place to place. We want to help find them something permanent.
Now, and is the hope most of the time reconciliation, or is the hope most of the time reconciliation with parents?
I'll start on the beginning of a case when it first opens. It's always going to be the goal is set to reunify with the parents. The parents are given like a set list of things that they need to do. And the kids are, of course, in the foster system at this point, and there's visitation that happens, but primarily it's waiting on the parents to accomplish these steps. And that's kind of how it starts. So the parents are given, an opportunity to do that. Bill Clinton signed into law, many years ago when he was governor, that you have to start looking at about 12 months, 12 to 15 months. They go back to a hearing to say, okay, have the parents checked off the boxes? Have they done everything they're supposed to do? are we ready to start maybe reunifying, or is this just not even going to happen? And so that's kind of the hinge point when we look at that.
Is there specific criteria that determines parents to be unfit, or is this really a case-by-case basis?
I would say it's really a case by case basis. That's not something that we as CASA determine. That
Sure.
comes from DHS when they go in and investigate a situation. They will look at that and say, okay, this is completely unsafe for the children. We have to take them at this point.
Yeah. The foster care system in and of itself is overwhelmed right now.
Yes.
How many kids really are we talking about across the state and in Polk County? Do we have the exact numbers?
Right now I have Pope Johnson and Franklin, because
Okay.
CASA, the 5th Judicial District, covers all 3 counties.
Sure.
So right now as CASA, we are serving this is my little cheat sheet over here.
I see it, yeah. Nicely done.
Like, see right
That's
there.
TV magic,
Let me just
folks.
glance over here.
Yeah.
So we're serving right now 158 kids in these 3 counties. Polk County, obviously, with the largest population because of children, which kind of matches the demographics. There's 16 kids we know of right now that we don't have a CASA for. So that they're still in the system, but they don't have anybody advocating for them. They don't have anybody really pushing and any kind of sense of consistency, which I think is what CASA gives them.
Okay, and so when we're talking about these 16 kids, they don't have a CASA advocate. What
Right.
happens to them?
They're still in the system. They still have DHS. They still have caseworkers. They could be in foster home. I mean, we really don't have any knowledge of that because until we are on the case with an advocate, we don't get access to all the information about that. So I can tell you right now, as soon as we get enough advocates and volunteers in, that we would serve every kid. We had one bright shining point that lasted for about a year where we were able to serve every kid. And with the pandemic numbers and everything happening, the numbers have skyrocketed of kids coming into care, which has led to the foster home crisis that you were talking about. And at the same time, where we still have a very good number of advocates, a lot of our advocates are having to double and sometimes triple up on cases because we're just trying to get these kids covered.
What was the result of the pandemic as it pertained to the foster care system? We know that we've got an emergency now, but what do we attribute that to?
I think a lot of it was part of the pandemic. It caused a lot of extra stress on people. I think in part of the training that I teach, when we have new advocates come in, I teach their training, and we start talking about environmental factors that can contribute to abuse. And, being laid off of work, having no income, having to figure out
Sure, yeah.
just the stress of having your whole life altered and having to be, quarantined and sequestered. And I've been a foster parent for years and have an adoptive mom now, but I love my kids, but they can make you crazy. So,
Right.
And you have to know your limits, right? You're like, okay, I need to stop and breathe. And
My kid's not adopted. She can make me crazy at times. It happens.
see,
right?
yeah. So, so you have to find your balance. But I think people not having that balance, and I think it attributed to a lot of other factors that wound up causing a lot of abuse, and people saw it and called it in. And now when they went back into school and the schools opened back up, and teachers, are a really high number of reports come in from teachers because they can recognize abuse in kids and recognize things that are wrong. And so
That actually brings up an interesting point. There was some conversation last school year when we were in the middle, still trying to figure out what this pandemic was looking like. That
Right.
the schools were really more or less acting as triage centers for these kids that were coming in who had not been in school for 6 months or so. Do we see that pretty frequently of cases coming in from schools, or are they more random calls? Where do these cases come from?
I honestly can't speak to a lot of that because those calls, when you call the hotline to report abuse, it's anonymous and
Sure.
it's supposed to be. So I honestly can't tell you where they're coming from. I don't get that information. But I can tell you that when kids go back into school, there tends to be a surge of numbers of kids coming into care. So it kind of leads one to assume
Right.
that it's coming from
Yeah.
the schools.
You talked about being an adoptive mom earlier. I
Yes.
want to touch on that here in just a few minutes, but right now, if you're in the market to buy or sell your home, you need to give us a call at Olathe Realty today. It's 479-968-5668, or cruise on over to russellvilleliving.com. I don't know that the word stigma is the right word, but I do think maybe fear, some apprehension for some
Mhm.
folks about becoming foster parents or even adoptive parents, because generally the perception is if they're in the system, then these kids, there's something wrong with these kids. That's not entirely true or even true at all, is it?
I wouldn't say that. I'd say you have to take into account, I mean, if you take any person, let's say, okay, you, and I don't know your growing up situation, so I'm going to put a pretend on you, okay?
Perfect. Let's do
So
that.
let's pretend you grew up with a mom and a dad, and they were severe addicts, okay? So what you witnessed as a child was probably a lot of behaviors that needed to happen. There may have been some unsafe people in your home.
Mhm.
There's a lot that went on that is not necessarily exposed to what we'll call a normal childhood. And I hate using the word normal because nobody's that way,
Right.
but you know what I mean. So, yes, the children who come into foster care, maybe they have a little bit more baggage, but because they've been exposed to so much more than what kids are supposed to be exposed to. So, one of the things I love about the training that we go through as you become an advocate is we really talk about what trauma does to children, what to expect, how to look at this, what it kind of alters a little bit in the brain. I'm not a brainologist, and that should be a real word. I'm not sure if it is, but it
It
should
is
be one.
now. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm not a brainologist, but I do understand I've been through enough training to see how these actually have long term effects
Mhm.
on the brain and how you have to kind of reteach patterns and things like that. And it's really fascinating stuff for me, but
I'm
it
I'm
makes
with
sense.
you on that because I actually am a bit of a nerd, if you couldn't already tell.
Ooh,
The term is neuroplasticity, and what it does is it teaches the brain to repeat certain patterns and behaviors that are observed. And so when you see this occurring over and over again, it does hardwire the brain. So these kids who have been exposed to this particular behavior over and over and over again, the
right.
brain says, I'm going to make this behavior easier because this is what you've observed.
Correct.
I don't know that foster parents, for the most part, as much training as I know that they get, and we'll go through what it is they have to go through in here in
Yeah.
just a few minutes. But do you think that foster parents really grasp what this is like until that first child comes in?
I'll speak from my experience as a foster parent. I did not. Like, I knew foster kids, they have always reputations coming in, like you said,
Sure.
the stigma. But I would say that I didn't understand as much as I understand now. I truly wish that I had gone through CASA first
Mhm.
and worked as a CASA for a bit where I could understand a lot more of what I was seeing on this side of the whatever, the curtain, I guess, for lack of words to use. Um, because you are limited as a foster parent as far as you don't get to speak in court. You don't get, I mean, you can talk to the child's attorney, but you can't that. And as a CASA, you actually get to speak up in court and say, "This is what I really think, and these are my opinions, and this is what I'm really concerned about." Um, I would say that anybody wanting to be a foster parent, which I think if you're able to, people should, because I think every kid needs a home, every kid. So, but I would also say I think it would be a good idea to come through CASA and work with us for a year and a half or two to actually kind of understand this whole process so that you don't get as frustrated on the other side of that.
We were talking to Bethany Bratton. She represents the CASA 5th Judicial District. When we come back, we're going to talk about the experience of a foster parent, what you have to do to become a CASA advocate, and more. We've got more Spotlight coming up right after this.
Am I doing
Oh, you're doing fine.
okay?
Doing fine. This is actually the break. We're actually going to show all of this. This is just the break.
Okay.
All right. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Spotlight, presented to you now by Alathus Realty. If you're in the market to buy or sell your home, give us a call today. It's 479-968-5668, or cruise on over to russellvilleliving.com. If you can't get enough of the Spotlight, don't worry. Every Friday morning at 8:30, the Spotlight is on KARV, that's AM 610, and 93.1 FM. Every Friday morning, check us out on the radio, KARV, that's AM 610, 93.1 FM, every Friday morning at 8:30. We have got Bethany Bratton in studio with us. She represents the 5th Judicial District of CASA. And, we were talking before the break. The parents may not necessarily really understand what it is that they're
Hmm.
walking into. But you do your best to try to help them understand that. What kind of training are foster parents really receiving? What does it look like?
Um, Yeah, it's been a good hot minute since I was a foster parent.
Okay.
So I can speak to when I was trained, which at this point was about 8 years ago. Um, we went through several Saturday classes. I had to drive to Clinton for my classes. We went through some of the emotions. We didn't. I don't remember going through the court system, kind of understanding how all that worked, kind of what to expect. And I remember probably the most impactful thing at the end was the actual foster family came in, the parents, and they just let us just openly ask a bunch of questions to say, what does this mean? And they teach you during that point, you are here so that the children can return back to home. You're giving them a safe place in a home so that you can get them to return back to their home. And that's, again, the goal when the case is open.
I More of a personal question than anything
Sure.
else. When you're doing this kind of work, you are exposed to probably some of the worst parts of humanity, I would imagine.
Yes, I would agree.
How do you balance that emotionally?
So one of the things that I really harp on, especially in our first week of training, is what self-care looks like. Because you see a lot of the ugly, and it's really easy to ignore all the ugly going around in your own community. We look at all the pretty stuff and like, oh, look, new buildings, oh, this, oh, and there's some very ugly things that happen in homes and things around here. And so you have to find a way and to breathe and to say, okay, I got to leave this here. One of the things I tell my volunteers, ultimately, we don't get to make the decision of what happens to these kids. I was like, sometimes that's a comfort, sometimes that's a frustration, but it sits on the judge's shoulders. We get to make recommendations. We get to say, Judge, I really have these concerns, or, hey, the mother has come this far and I'm really proud of her. I think we're getting close to the point we can bring the child back, but ultimately it's the judge's decision on what happens. But he listens to all parties. He listens to CASA, he listens to DHS and the parents attorneys, and tries to make the absolute best decision for these kids.
Ultimately, do we see positive outcomes at the end of this, or is there a decent percentage of that? Tell me that there's good news at the end of this.
There's a lot of good news. One of our favorite things we have on our wall in our office, and it's a heart box. So every time a kid finds permanency, we put their name, just their first name, with privacy
Clearly,
protected.
Right, exactly.
And we drop it into that box, and our little box on our wall is full, and we're gonna have to get another one. So
that's good news.
That's wonderful news. So when we can happily close cases because the parents have worked so hard and have because they know that, okay, we messed up, or we're in this situation, and they're given all of these opportunities by DHS to get counseling, to get the rehab they need, to their children are taken care of at the moment, get back on your feet, get an apartment, get a house, get all that kind of stuff worked out, and then bring your family back together. And so, I've sat through some reunifications and, tears stream.
Sure.
I have sat through adoptions that, were not my own. I sat through,
Right.
And again, tears are streaming because, in an adoption, you're sitting here watching this family get formed out of, what was strangers, maybe a year or two ago. So it's a pretty amazing thing.
I wonder too if the foster parents who have walked through this process with this child, is there some training for them for when that child ultimately leaves and does reunify? I would think that would be really difficult.
I will say that there's a little bit of that. For me personally, when I knew a child was about to the point where they were going to leave, I would hurry up and get another one. And I know that sounds terrible, but it's not like I was replacing them, but I had somewhere to focus my, it's like, okay, now this one needs me. I'm going to take care of this one and this one's situation. And so for me, that kept me going for the 5 years that I did that. And I only got out because we wound up adopting 3 kids. And so we were like, okay. And then we got surprised with one. So 4 was enough.
Wow, okay,
So
4.
yeah. So one surprise and 3 picked out. So
Outstanding. Casa volunteers.
Yes.
Hey, I want to volunteer. I want to get involved. I don't know how, and I don't know what to expect. Walk me through the process.
I know how to do that. No.
Thanks. Perfect. That's why you're here.
That's right. That's so you can go to our website. It's arcasa5.org. And so you go to that, there's a button right there. It says apply now on the top little banner, and that fills out the volunteer application, and that's going to come to me. And so I will immediately turn around, text you or call you and get it set up to start talking to answer all of the questions. Just because you turn in an application, you're not committed. If you just have questions, you can always call us at 479-880-1195, and I'll visit with you then. Or you can just go to our Facebook page, Casa of the 5th Judicial District, and you can just message us. And usually I respond to a lot of those and answer any questions you have. If there's something you don't understand about the process, anything like that. So we have a training class coming up, which is super important. Our training does go 5 weeks because we really dig into what's going on with the child, like we talked about.
Right.
So October 12th, we'll open the next class. So I have to have applications in by the 8th, by October 8th. And then it will meet on Monday nights via Zoom. Still want to pandemic safe.
Right.
So we're going to meet via Zoom on Monday nights, usually around 5:30 to 8:30, and we'll do that for 5 weeks. So
speaking of pandemic safe,
yes.
I would have to assume that not only CASA but DHS, just as a whole, that the foster care system had to make some changes because of the pandemic.
Yes, we have.
What really was affected? How did it shift?
Unfortunately, some of the negative side effects that we've seen is because some of the parents may have been positive. Some of the visits were cut out with the kids. They didn't get to see their parents, or maybe the kids in the foster homes were positive for COVID. We've cautioned all of our volunteers at this time to use extreme precautions in doing visits, advising them to use, technology right now to visit via Zoom if possible. We just want everybody to be safe. We don't want anybody
Right.
being hurt. If the family's in agreement, everybody's in agreement, the foster family and the child and the CASA volunteer, and they want to do that, we ask them to still use those precautions, wear masks, all of the safe things when they're trying to get together to do that.
When you took this position, you clearly had a heart for kids. You clearly wanted to do something different. What was the biggest culture shock for you in this position?
Oh, that's a good question. I honestly cannot say that I had a culture shock. I knew what I was walking into with that. Probably the number. I'll take that back. The number of kids and watching the severity. It seems like in the last 6 to 8 months, a lot of the cases that have come through, there's been just a huge amount of sexual abuse that has come through with these kids and stuff. And that still just to my core makes me ill. That is something that kids are having to face and to deal with. So when you go back to that question about kids coming in, damaged or whatever, it's, there's some baggage and they need people.
You were talking about your district is Pope, Johnson, and Yale County, correct?
No, Franklin, Pope, Johnson, and Franklin
Pope, Johnson,
County.
and Franklin County. When you're looking at the totality of the situation and you see the population is fairly decent,
yes.
Why don't we have more foster parents?
I cannot answer that. I know the mindset a lot of people, because if they find out you're involved in any way with foster care, which, CASA is not a foster parent, it's a different type program, but they'll still come and I get questions a lot. And the response I get, I don't think I could let them go. I hear that one a lot. And when I was a foster parent, I guess mentally, I always had this wall kind of up that I knew these weren't my kids and that they were going to be going. And, I was like a super nanny or something that just, I'm taking care of these kids, loved them, gave them everything they needed, but I knew that they were going to go. As a CASA, you develop those same attachments to these kids. We have a girl right now at a facility and she's precious. She's 15 years old and she's just absolutely precious. And she calls her CASA every night because she doesn't have anybody else to talk to. And that's not the norm for every CASA, so don't get freaked out thinking you're going to get 100 phone calls. But this one particular CASA is amazing. And she says, no, I want her to call me. I want her to feel like she can talk to me at any moment she needs me. And it's just made a huge difference for this girl. And that's the kind of thing that we need. We need people who don't mind stepping up and who will pay a lot of attention to these kids and give the kids someone to talk to outside of when they need some help or when they just want to talk.
There was a conversation that I had in ministry school a long time ago. The pastor looked at me and he said, if you're going to do this well, if you're not close enough to have your heart broken, you're not close enough. Is that true for Casa Advocates?
I would say from every advocate I talk to that yes, that's true. I think that situation, I mean, it comes true for us, and we're not the ones out there on face to face with the kids most of the time. But yeah, I would say that's true because we care about these kids. They need people to care about them. So whatever situation that landed them into foster care is typically never their fault, and they just need somebody that's going to champion them and support them. Talk about their dreams. It's very short sighted when you're in foster care. Where am I sleeping tonight? Where am I
Right.
going tomorrow? You don't have time to stop and think about your future to say, what do I want to be? Where are my
Right.
goals? And that's something that CASAs do. We talk to them about long-term goals. Well, of course, not the 3-year-olds. They all want
Sure.
to be princesses and mermaids and firemen. And so
And
I'm
they
like,
should
go.
be those
And
things.
that's perfect.
Right.
That's what we
Exactly.
want. So, and that's amazing. But, especially with our teens and our older kids in foster care, again, it's very short sighted, and getting them to look at that long distance plan. Our CASAs are very skilled at doing that. We do some extra training for all of our CASAs that work with the older kids. We have that available. It's called Fostering Futures, and I help teach that too. And so but
Right.
it's really focused on having the kid make life plans. What do you want to do? What do you want to be?
Yeah.
Foster care is not the end. They can be in foster care till they're 21, but what do you want to do? What are your goals at this point? And so I think that's something huge that CASAs bring to these kids, where they don't feel like it's a mom that's on their back, or they don't. Sometimes you have that dynamic with the foster parents that you may not have with a CASA, because we're a friend, not having to mom
Right.
you. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
It does. We are wrapping up here with Bethany Bratton on the spotlight. Remember, if you're in the market to buy or sell your home, give us a call today. It's 479-968-5668, or you can cruise on over to russellvilleliving.com. Bethany, as we are wrapping up, I'd like
Yes,
to
sir.
hear some success stories. Obviously, not specifically, but what are some of
True.
the best success stories?
Oh my gosh. We had a case where when the children came into care, and this is a long story, so I'm going to make it really short, but basically they were feral children. I'm going to put it that way.
Wow.
They would like eat off of the floor. Now, this is an extreme case, again, not the normal, but like literally they were eating off of the floor. The older child had some disabilities, so the middle child would like smell the food, whatever's on the floor. And this is how the parents fed them. They just threw things on the floor. Um, so that went into a termination and parental rights, and then it moved on to an adoption, and those kids are thriving right now. All three of them are speaking now. They couldn't speak before. They were only spoken to with grunts, and so they're all speaking. They've had therapies. They have some amazing parents now because they've been adopted, and the children are, I think the oldest one has started, I want to say, first grade this year. um, they've been with this same home for a couple of years now and are doing amazing. And it's just, I mean, I could give you story after story, but stories like that just melt my heart, that they came out of all of this mess and turned out to have such a bright future ahead of them.
Bethany Bratton, thanks so much for being here on the spotlight. If folks want to help out with CASA, how do they get a hold of you?
The quickest way is to go to our website, arcasa5.org, and they can click apply now. All of our phone numbers are on there. You can connect with any of us you want there, or go to our Facebook page and just message us. That's fine too.
All right, outstanding. Bethany Bratton, thanks so much for being here on the spotlight. And folks, thank you for joining us on the spotlight today. As always, presented by Alathus Realty. If you're in the market to buy or sell your home, you need to give us a call today. It's 479-968-5668, or cruise on over to russellvilleliving.com. My name is Drew Brent. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.